Anthony Horowitz, you're responsible for the latest detective we've seen. What is so compelling about detective stories, do you think?
It's a question I get asked often. What is it that makes detectives somehow grab the imagination the way they do? And I think that there are lots of reasons for the sort of success and popularity of detectives. The first of which is that they do tie in very well, I think, with the English character. If you think about it, the English have always been very well known for making detectives, Sherlock Holmes, Poirot, etc. The English tend to hide their emotions, just as killers hide what they're going to do, and a detective's job is to dig underneath the surface to try and find out what people are doing. So I think it does tie in very well with the sort of English character, and I think it's a reason why a lot of English detective series take place in the countryside and have very strong traditional values, as does Foyle's War. I think there's a second reason for it, which is that it's the element of murder heightens things. You're not interested in the local baker until he's found dead with 3 knives in his back, and then suddenly he becomes interesting, and his wife is interesting, and his son is interesting, and everybody in the village is interesting. So throwing a murder into the middle of an ordinary community, I think, automatically makes it very much more fun and interesting to watch. And I suppose the third and final reason is that everybody likes puzzles. I think that we are a nation that wastes enormous amounts of time doing crossword puzzles and any sorts of puzzles, illusions, tricks, those sort of things, and that's just part of our character too. So there are lots of reasons for it, but those are 3 of them.
So how did Foyle's War come about?
Well, Foyle's War was the result of the Network Centre, who are the people, of course, who control everything which is seen on ITV, suddenly realising that they needed quickly a new detective series to go out on Sunday nights. The feeling at the time was that Morse, of course, had sadly come to an end, and other shows, Frost, Taggart, were going. Even Midsummer Murders at that time seemed to be on its way out. And so they put out a tender to find a new detective series, and I think got something like 300 different ideas sent to them. Must have been murder, just going through them all. And they kept whittling it down. It was sort of it was a Network Centre's version of Pop Idol, where they sort of, every week sort of more people got thrown out, till eventually there were only 3 left, of which Foyle's War was one, and those 3 were made, and here we are.
So what made you decide on the Second World War as a background to it? Because, of course, that is classed as period, and period is really much more expensive to do than other things, which might have counted against your idea of being accepted.
Well, yes, I mean, it was difficult and dangerous to go the period route. And I do remember that when we did say Second World War, eyes glazed, because it is a terribly expensive and difficult thing to do. I had decided first and foremost that I had spent so long, I wrote a great many episodes of Midsummer Murders, and as much as I loved that show, still do, I felt that all the work and labour that went into writing these scripts and producing and making them, all they ended up coming to, all they boiled down to was the butler did it, the vet did it, the doctor did it, that's it. And I was very keen to see if the detective genre could be used to just write about something more general than its own inward world of murder. And it seemed to me that if you put a detective series against something really big, something major like the Second World War, for example, you would then have a very interesting balance where actually the murder would become almost the least interesting thing going on. When England's about to lose the war and Dunkirk is happening and the Germans are going to invade any day now, as in the first episode, the German woman, who gives a damn when a body's being found in an English country house? So that was the impetus and the idea of doing it. Why the Second World War? Well, you say it's period. I never thought of it really as period in the sense of it's not roughs and sort of horses and swords. It's still a very recognisable modern time. These are still murders that use telephones and radio communications and cars. So it is in a sense modern in one way, but still period in another. And I shied away or tried to persuade the Network Centre that this wasn't really period. That said, of course, it is. And it has been enormously difficult. Every single shot you have to, you block out yellow lines, you have to block out signposts, you have to take out satellite dishes.
Double glazing.
Double glazing. I mean, of course, the wrong sorts of windows. And of course, the war destroyed so many buildings that, trying to do wartime London for occasional shots is almost impossible. That, incidentally, is why I decided to set it on the south coast. I realised that London would just be an impossibility to do.
You've said that there's nothing more exciting for you than a new idea. So how excited did you get when you suddenly thought, gosh, I think I'm onto a winner here?
Well, I didn't think I was onto a winner until the things were shown. I mean, one of my favourite quotes of all time is William Goldman in the book Adventures in the Screen Trade, Nobody Knows Anything. And I always think that's true. When you're writing a show, when you're producing it, when you're making it, when you're even up to the day it's transmitted, nobody really knows anything. I think I got the first buzz of excitement when Michael Kitchen agreed to play Christopher Foyle. Getting an actor of that caliber and someone who was in a way untried or unseen rather in the sense of carrying a whole series on his own shoulders, and the fact that he accepted and agreed to do it gave me the first buzz of feeling, hey, we could have something very special here. And then, of course, as the series was shown on television and the public came behind it, there was a fantastic sense of excitement and of achievement. Because, of course, one of the things that happens in this country in particular is when anything new happens, the press and various other people are waiting really to knock it down rather than to try and support it. And to realise that you've done it and you actually have done something and done it not cynically either. You know, this wasn't a show that was bolted together to make money. It was a show that we believed in. And when something that you believe in actually works, it is a wonderful feeling. And of course, we're very happy.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a vague idea that you wanted Michael Kitchen to play the part when you started writing it? Did you have somebody in mind, or were you writing it with a completely blank canvas?
Well, you first of all have to remember that when a writer writes a piece of television, he is often the last person to get involved with casting. That's certainly true in my case. I don't have really a great deal of involvement in it. I'm not even very good at it. I do only remember that once the first script had been written and we were casting around for who would play it, there was a list drawn up, and Michael's name was very much the first name on that list, in a sort of a if only sort of feeling, you know, if only we can get him. And I can't say that I had written the part specifically for him, but again, it's interesting that historically the first episode, The German Woman, was written a year before the other three were made. This was because the network were originally going to put it out as a pilot, but as it happened, they recommissioned and just went out with all four. So creating the character, a lot of that work happened in the year after the first one had been written, when Michael had come to the table, as it were, and brought a great deal of ideas and thoughts and approaches with him. And so he was instrumental in making Christopher Foyle, and Christopher Foyle really was fully born after the first episode.
Did you find the way you wrote the next three was actually slightly different to the way you thought you might write the three once Michael Kitchen was on board?
I think what's interesting about looking at the four films together is how very different they all are. I mean, the first one is quite a light-hearted in some ways. I mean, it has got the internment story, which is more serious, but basically the murder in it is quite it veers towards the Midsummer Murders territory. Then in the second one, you're suddenly into this very dark, anti-Semitic, fascistic world of the black shirts and Oswald Mosley and all that. Then the third one is again different, and the fourth is actually quite a light-hearted and rather cheerful episode in many ways. They're very, very different films, and the development of them was, in a way, accidental, unplanned. I mean, we were working under a certain amount of pressure to get them done, and as I've said, Michael was coming up with ideas that were shaping the way his character would work, and I suppose that's a through line. In fact, all the actors brought ideas to the table that had to get incorporated, but it wasn't planned mechanically, as it were. It just grew.
Hmm. So how did you come up with the name Christopher Foyle?
Well, that was, of course, that's always a difficult thing to do, to get the title right. When we pitched it, it was called The Blitz Detective. I'm very glad that we dropped that, although I knew at the time it was only a working title. And I knew that it was going to be somebody's war, because you talked about how was your war. It's a thing one says about the 40s, how was your war? And it seemed to me that that there was a sort of a slight double play there, that Foyle's war, or this person's war, was his own personal war, which in this case is a war against crime as much as anything else. As to the name Foyle himself, I was doing a lot of research and buying a great many books, and I nearly always buy my books at Foyle's, the famous bookshop in London. And it sort of just hit me one day that was the perfect name for the detective as I was going into the shop. There it was in front of me. If you've ever been to Foyle's, what's delightful about the shop is it is a very 1940s shop, and of course it was owned by Christina Foyle, hence Christopher, who is one feels a sort of a lady of letters of the 40s particularly. And it is still, I mean, they've now modernised the bottom floor, but if you go through and up the stairs, you suddenly find yourself back in time. And so it was just a sort of an obvious thing, and then of course there's a little added extra, which is that he foils crime. I mean, that's very subconscious and it's not intentional, but that to me was quite a nice little added thing to it. And so Foyle's War, it was.
That's nice. Are names very important to your characters? I mean, are they an integral part of their character when you're working out what they're going to be.
Yes, I mean, I've always belonged to the sort of Charles Dickens school of names, which is that the first thing first thing that you know about a character is the character's name, and therefore giving the character a certain sort of name will tell you something about that character. And you have to be careful about that, not to go into like Dickensian sort of Wackford Squares type names, which won't work in a modern drama. But even so, yes, names are very important, and in this one, for Christian names, obviously one is using a lot of 1940s names, so you're into sort of Howards and Allens and Stanleys and Arthurs, those sort of names which are sort of redolent of 1940 immediately. And then for the curator, the art curator, whose name I always quite liked in the fourth episode, Austin Carmichael. Somehow you just know that a guy called Austin Carmichael is going to be a creepy antique dealer, and it's rather nice that the actor Anton Lesser doesn't actually play it too Austin Carmichael-ish. He pulls back and makes the guy real. Guy Spencer in the second episode, I think that's a good name for a fascist character. I don't quite know why. Guy and Spencer are so English, both of them, and yet somehow together, I just know I'm not going to like this guy. So yes, names are important, and I spent a lot of time thinking about them.